Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alim hakim. Wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-'azim. Allahumma 'allimna mimma yanfa'una wanfa'na bima 'allamtana wanzilna min fadlika ilman wa ta'liman innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. Assalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So last week we talked about the aspect of, does God actually exist, and we went over some of the proofs that we use to prove the actual existence of God. The week before that we looked at how we ascertain the things that we know, so whether it be by means of empirical knowledge or whether it be by means of rational understanding or knowledge, and we discussed those two in particular. There's a third that we also touched on that we haven't gone into yet, which is the aspect of shar'i knowledge, or religiously sanctioned knowledge. And the reason why we haven't gone into detail about that just yet is because the aspect of religious knowledge is that first you have to establish that you actually believe in God first and foremost. After that, then there's the aspect of religion in and of itself, because just because a person believes in God does not mean that they're going to hold the same religious views as you do. And so this is why we've been kind of going step by step, looking at how we can come to an understanding from an Islamic perspective. So today what we're going to look at more in depth of how do we associate ourselves in terms of our understanding of who God is. Because as one of my teachers, he did in a presentation that he recorded, he mentioned that one of the biggest problems that we have in terms of discussing the concept of God, or the concept of the existence of God, is that we are sometimes using the same terms, but we have two completely different meanings. Meaning that I may be describing God as being the necessarily existent, while somebody else, they're talking about God meaning a supernatural being. And so we're talking about the same term, but in terms of a different understanding. And so now we want to kind of make sure that we both have the same understanding, or should I say we all have the same understanding of who God is. So for example, one of the things that many Islamic scholars always do when they first write a book or they're going over a particular topic is they define what it is that they're going to be going over. And so you do that so that you and whoever it is that you're going to be talking to or engaging with will understand who and what it is that you're talking about. Because again, if I just use the word God and I would say, okay, what does God mean to you, or what does God mean to you, and so on and so forth, as many people as I ask, I could possibly get that many answers. And so in order to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about God, we say that there are some necessary attributes that we say that God has. We also say that there are certain things that we would say are impossible for God. Now this is a concept that will sometimes stir people a little bit, in the sense that, we always say that, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, فَعَالُ لِمَا يُرِيدُ, that He does whatever He wishes. And so sometimes this can be problematic for people, just for the mere fact, that if I say that God does or can do whatever He wills, but at the same time I'm also saying that God has certain things that are impossible, or that we attribute to being impossible towards God, then that seems like it might be a contradiction. However, the aspect of it is that it's not a contradiction. The reason why it's not a contradiction goes back to what we talked about in the very first class that we did here, where we talked about three different types of knowledge. We said that you have a hukm adi, which is empirical knowledge. You have a hukm aqli, which is a rational understanding, a rational knowledge, and then you have a hukm shar'i, which is a religious legal knowledge. The thing is that when we're talking about the aspect of things being impossible for God, we're talking about it from the standpoint of hukm aqli. Similar to like the example that I gave before, is that, will this ever be true? Is there any possible way that we could ever come to the concept that this will ever be true? So at the same time that we would say that, and the thing is that you're coming from a rational perspective. Rationally, you know that this can never happen. There's no way in the world or outside the world could this ever be the case. And so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about impossibilities towards God, meaning that these type of things, like, things that are completely irrational. Like, for example, like we said before, some people try to say, well, if God can do whatever he wants, can God create a rock that he can't lift? We would say that the question in of itself is ridiculous. Why? Because it necessitates a understanding that contradicts itself. Because one of the things that we're going to talk about in terms of God is that we're going to say that God is all-powerful. So if a person asks a question, can God create a rock that he can't lift? Basically, at that point in time, you're trying to say, can God be in a situation where he's all-powerful and not at the same time? Which is a logical fallacy. So we say that the question in of itself is ridiculous. And so this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the aspects of impossibilities towards God. Meaning that those things that are not associated with, basic rationality. So the first thing that we're going to mention in terms of the necessary attributes of God, in Arabic we call it wujud. In English, it's referred to just as existence. However, when it comes to God, we take a different approach when we say existence. Because outside of the scientific realm, everyone in here exists, right? No one doesn't exist. The reason why I say outside the scientific realm, because science even questions that. What truly exists? Do we truly exist? And so on and so forth. I'm not going down that route right now. You exist at this point. But the whole thing is that your existence, my existence, everything that we see around us in terms of existence, we say about that it's merely possible. Or in Arabic we say mumkin al-wujud, that it's just merely possibly existent. Meaning that there's nothing that necessitates that I exist, or that you exist, or anything else that we see around us exists. There's nothing that necessitates that that's the case. So we're just possible. We exist because what? Well, from an Islamic standpoint, we say because Allah said to. Just as our existence will come to an end whenever Allah decides that will be the case. However, when we're talking about God and we're talking about existence, we say that God, he is the necessary existent. His existence is necessary, meaning that what? He has to exist. One of the basic understandings that we have in terms of why this is the case is you yourself. You remember last week when we talked about the aspect of creation, how each of us are created from our parents, they're created from their parents, and so on and so forth. And we all agreed that the concept of having just infinite regression, we just keep saying that, well, these two came from their parents, these two came from their parents, this one came from this parents. Eventually what's going to happen is that if you're going to ponder it long enough, you're going to say there had to be a starting point where there was someone that did not have parents that came into existence. However, that same person that came into existence, we have to say that they could not have come into existence by someone else who came into existence. Why? Because if that person that created that first person came into existence, then the next question is going to be, okay, who created them? And then it's going to be, okay, who created them? And as you see, it's just going to be an infinite regression. And so this is why we say that God is a necessarily existent being, meaning that he does not have a beginning. Meaning that his existence is outside of are aspects of contingency. Because again, we're all contingent, meaning that we're all dependent. That's what, more or less what we're talking about. When I say contingent, I'm more or less, looking from the standpoint of dependency. And this is what we say about everything in the universe. Everything in the universe is dependent. The earth itself is dependent. Without the aspect of gravity and other aspects, the earth could not function. The sun is dependent. Without the aspect of hydrogen and nitrogen and whatever other gases and so on and so forth are there, the sun could not shine. So on and so forth. Everything that we see around us is dependent. In order for all those things to come into existence, you have to have a being that is a necessarily exists, that is not dependent upon anything. And this goes into the aspect of Surah Al-Ikhlas. This is a real good reason why the Prophet ﷺ used to say about Surah Al-Ikhlas that is 1/3 of the Quran. Because basically 1/3 of our understanding of the deen can be taken from just a few verses in Surah Al-Ikhlas. This aspect of necessary existence, you can more or less put this into one word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses in the Quran, as-samad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Ikhlas, what? Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad. What does as-samad represent? As-samad, if you want to give a definition to it, as-samad is the one who is completely free of all need, however everything else is in need of him. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes himself as such. That is his reality. Everything in existence is in need of Allah. He brought it into existence. However, he himself is in need of nothing. So this is one of the first bases that we start with in terms of our understanding of God. And again, this contradicts certain other theologies that are out there, because other theologies, one of the ways that they look at God is from the standpoint of supernatural. Meaning that they'll just say about God is that he goes outside of what we consider to be natural or materialistic or whatever the case may be. And again, when I say materialistic, I'm not talking about from the standpoint of shopping and stuff like that. I'm talking about materialistic in terms of the scientific approach that everything that is in existence is a material substance. So the thing is that God is outside that material substance. Why? Because material substance, they're what? They're dependent. Everything that's a material substance is dependent. By bare minimum, everything that's a material substance is dependent upon what? Time and space. Like for example, we have how many directions? We have 6. Up, down, front, back, right, left. You have 6 directions. What is the nature of a direction? The nature of a direction is that at bare minimum, you always need 2 things. And when I say you need 2 things, I'm not saying that there's specifically 2 things. I'm just saying that literally, in order for a direction to even exist, you need 2 things. Why? Because I can only be in a direction to something in relation to something else. Like I can only be in front of something if there's something for me to be in front of. I can only be behind something if there's something to me to be behind, and so on and so forth. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was asked about Allah, the Prophet ﷺ, he was asked by one of the Sahaba, where was Allah before he created creation? And the Prophet ﷺ responded by saying, Can Allah wa la shay ma'hu. Allah was, and there was nothing with him. Now the thing is that if that's the case, then how can direction apply to Allah when there is nothing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This is the aspect, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's not bound by time and space and these things that we as material are bound by. He created time and space. And so he is not going to be limited by his creation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his existence is necessary. The next one, in Arabic, is called qidam. And essentially what it means is that he has beginninglessness. And essentially what this means is that he does not have a beginning. If you want me to get technical, I'm going to have to double check if this is actually a word.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I was going to say, now is that a word? Yeah. I was like, okay. Yeah, I definitely was going to ask you, is that a word?
But You get the concept. But this gives you an indication of why, like for example, we say about a translation of the Quran that is not the Quran. Why? Because you can't translate from one language to another, exactly. Like Qidam.
So spell Hidam.
Qidam, Qaf, Dal, Mim. You asked me to spell it. Qidam. 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 Yeah. Qadim.
What was the first one? Existence.
Exists. Wujud.
Spell it. You know me.
Wujud.
Oh, we're good.
Qidam. Beginninglessness. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have a beginning. And this goes back to that example that we gave before. Is that if we keep going to that aspect of infinite regression, and we're saying that this thing had a beginning, and that beginning was because of this, if this had a beginning because that was because of that, so on and so forth, you're just going to have this infinite regression. So that's why we say about God, He has to be the one that does not have a beginning. Meaning that He did not come to start to exist. God is the one who always existed. Now the thing is that one of the things we have to understand is that there are going to be certain things about God that we're not going to fully understand with our intellects. And the reason why that is because intellectually, we are only capable of understanding things based upon our five senses. There are certain things that we're not going to be able to understand. So for example, how many people in here have children, niece, nephew that are still young, 4 or 5, around that age? Okay, grandchildren, whatever. Now, if your niece, nephew, child, grandson, whatever the relationship is, asks you, mama, baba, auntie, uncle, whatever the case may be, how does nuclear fission work? What are you going to tell them? Now, someone said the magic phrase. I'm going to just Google it. Even if you Google it and they give you a whole description about what nuclear fission is, are you still going to try to explain it to them? A 5-year-old? Why are you not going to try to explain it to them? Because your basic understanding from you being a human being and just being an older human being is that you understand that their intellect is not at a level where they're going to be able to comprehend it. No matter how detailed I go with it, no matter how much I think I may understand of it, so on and so forth, their intellect is not at the level to be able to understand it. So if that's the case between two human beings that just have a few years between them, what about the creator of the heavens and the earth and His creation? Is it ever fathomable that we can ever know everything that Allah knows? And so this is one of this aspect of, like, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the one who has no beginning. Is that intellectually we can't really fathom that. Why? Because everything that we know has a beginning. Like if I go around the room and ask everyone their birth date, most of the time they'll be able to tell me. They may not want to, but they could if they were pressured to. But that aspect of everything having a beginning. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that's described with qidam. He has beginninglessness. He does not have a beginning. And this goes back to His aspect of Him being the necessary existent. Is that everything else has a beginning because He brought it into existence. This is why when we gave that example of the mother and the father and so on and so forth, is that the ultimate reality is that, as someone had mentioned, yes, your mother and father did not actually bring you into existence. Why? Because if human beings had their choice, let's just be honest. Fortunately, that everyone here is over puberty, so all these things are known. But if you want to be honest, most of the people that are coming to existence, even the people that are in their room, it wasn't necessarily fully planned that you would come here, so to speak. Meaning that your mother and father, they may have been hoping for a child, but they may not have. And it could have just been a complete surprise. And the thing is that, even from a scientific, biological level, they actually say that most women, if not possibly, well, it's be hard to say all, but most women, whether they know it or not, have had a miscarriage in their life. And the thing is that the thing that's only in recent times have we been able to, understand more of this with, the advent of earlier pregnancy detection and stuff like that. But previously, for some situations, is that many women would have a miscarriage, but they would never know it was a miscarriage. Why? Because it would correspond with their menstrual cycle, so that it would just seem like it's a part of the menstrual cycle. That's what they label as a chemical pregnancy. Meaning, essentially, like if a woman would take a pregnancy test, it would show up as being positive, but it was not going to, go through. And so the reason why I mention that is that, we can't even, come to a situation where we can, guarantee that we'll be able to reproduce, let alone the people who are just not able to reproduce and so on and so forth. So this aspect of, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being a necessary existent, one that actually brings things into existence, and him not having beginning because he's not one that's created and so on and so forth. These are things that we have to understand about God himself. This goes against, again, some other theologies, and not just Christianity, but other theologies, where they will say things like, God can be born. Now, the thing is that if you think about it from a rational standpoint, that really make that much sense. Because what is the nature of being born? You're going from non-existence to existence. Now the thing is that if you're going to say that God or a portion of God was non-existent, now you're going to say that, either God was weak, which is going to disrupt some of the attributes that we attribute to a God, or you're going to say that God didn't exist at all. And that makes absolutely no sense, because what happened, all those years before God came into existence? Not only that, but now you're also limiting God to space and time, and also all the other weaknesses that human beings have, and so on and so forth. So, again, this is why we want to come to an understanding of who it is that we're talking about when we say God. If we're not on the same understanding of who it is that we're talking about when we say God, then if I have a discussion with someone and they're thinking about a supernatural being and I'm talking about the necessarily existent, then the conversation is going to be completely pointless. Ultimately, it probably will still be pointless anyway, but it'll even be more pointless if we are talking about two completely different beings. The next one, baqa, everlastingness. Everlastingness, meaning that God does not come to an end. He does not cease to exist. So the first one, beginning this existence, his existence does not have a beginning, and his existence does not have an end. Everlastingness. It's just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Rahman, كُلُّ مَا عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذِي الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. Where the translation, the meaning of the verse is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that everything upon it is perishing, meaning everything upon the earth or in the universe is perishing. وَيَبْقَى, but everlasting is the countenance, the essence, the face of your Lord. ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ, that the one possessed of might and majesty. And so yabqa is where we get that aspect of baqa. Baqa, yabqa has the same root. So everlastingness is the next attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the aspect of something ceasing to exist is again an aspect of weakness. We don't attribute weakness to God, because if that's the case, then he's attributed to the aspects of his creation. We have weakness. We cease to exist. As we said before, if the human being had his preference, he probably would live forever if he could. I wouldn't necessarily be in that boat, but I probably would be around for a little longer. But the aspect of God himself is that he is always existent. He never ceases to exist. So again, contrary to other theologies, for example, we don't say that the human being has a capability to kill God. Like, that doesn't really make sense. From my perspective, it's kind of like, okay, what type of God do you worship such that you can kill your God? And so the aspect of God is that we say that He is everlastingness. He does not cease to exist. Whereas everything else in creation, it does eventually cease to exist. Part of this is the aspect of us being contingent. We're dependent. So as soon as those things that we're dependent upon, are not readily available, or we can't process it the same way, then we cease to exist. But again, God is not dependent upon anything. The next one, that He is completely different from His creation. مخالفته للحوادث is the Arabic term. And when we say this is an absolute. Meaning that there is no way, shape, or form that we can ever compare God to anything in creation. This is why the great Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, he's related to have said that anything that you bring to your mind to be God, God is different from that. God is other than that. God is not subject to anything in creation. This is what Allah SWT says in the Quran. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. That there's nothing like His likeness, but He's all seeing, all hearing. Or all hearing, all seeing. Now the thing is that we're going to come to this aspect of all hearing, all seeing as well. But even if you look at it from just that perspective, for example, how many people know what's going on in the room next door to us? How many people know what's going on in the room over there that's across the hall? How many people know what's going on in the houses over there? So on and so forth. Now the thing is that just the mere thought of trying to contemplate all those different things at the same time, it's like, our minds would, go on overload. We couldn't handle it. What we say about God is that He knows everything that goes on, outwardly or inwardly. عَالِمُ الْغَيْبِ وَشَهَادَةِ وَهُوَ الرَّحْمَنُ الرَّحِيمُ. That He knows the unseen as well as that which is manifested. And so the thing is that this is the aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being different from His creation. That, He, and this is one of the reasons why some of the mufassirin, the scholars of tafsir, they mention that Allah, after saying لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, that there's nothing like His likeness, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ, but also mentioning that He is the one who is all hearing, all seeing, to indicate that His hearing and His seeing is nothing like how we hear and we see. Because our hearing and our seeing is what? It's dependent. You tearing out all the lights, let the sun go down and so on and so forth, what's going to happen? Even the glass is not going to help us. I think I've seen something on my mother's page that wasn't necessarily all that appropriate, but it was talking about the concept of, having a friend that can actually see in the dark when you're driving. But the aspect of it is that, if you were to devoid us of light, just imagine how our world would be. The only reason why we can see is because we have some aspect of light. But the thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees all. Not only that, but even the stuff that we hide, we haven't even revealed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. So again, this is the aspect of Him being different from creation. He doesn't have eyes or ears or eardrums and things of that nature. That's what we need. We utilize those. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's completely different from His creation. But at the same time, He is self-sufficient. قِيَامُهُ بِنَفْسِهِ. Self-sufficient, when we're talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being self-sufficient, meaning that He is absolutely not in need of anything. It goes back to that aspect of as-samad that's mentioned in Surah Al-Ikhlas. When we're saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is self-sufficient, is that He is not in need of His creation. So for example, the great Imam Tahawi rahimahullah ta'ala, that he said in his one of his treatises, one of his poems, that the translation of the meaning being that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He encompassed His names without needing to bring anything into existence for that. Meaning that, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's known as the creator, al-Khaliq. But the thing is that even if He never created anything, he's still attributed with being al-Khaliq. That is his attribute that he has. He doesn't need to create in order for him to be considered to be al-Khaliq. He is the creator, even if he never creates anything. You know, so on and so forth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's completely self-sufficient. He is not in need of anything. Because again, if you have something that is dependent, then again, you cannot say that that thing is fully a God. Why? Because that entails an aspect of weakness. If I'm dependent upon something and I can't get that thing, then that means that there's an aspect of power that that thing has over me. You know, for the human being, if you don't have oxygen, what happens? You don't have water, what happens? You don't have food, what happens? You know, so on and so forth. Even from the standpoint of social aspects. You know, they mention and they do studies of how, you know, people who are loners, people that, you know, live their life alone and so on and so forth, that, you know, emotionally they don't do as well as people who have spouses. Or, for example, people who are married, you know, for long periods of time. Like, you know, a person that's married to someone for 40, 50, 60 years. And then one of the spouses passes away. Generally speaking, that other spouse will pass away shortly after that other spouse. That connection, that need that we have, that social aspect, it's there, it's present. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is self-sufficient. He doesn't need any of that. He's the one that created everything. قِيَامُهُ بِنَفْسِهِ. Now we'll start getting to some terms that we're probably more familiar with. The next one, وَحْدَانِيَّة, oneness. And essentially it comes from the same root as tawheed. You know, many of us have probably heard the term tawheed before. Wahdaniyya, comes from the same root, wahada. You know, anyone that knows their Arabic alphabet, their Arabic numbers, they know that it goes wahid ithnain thalatha, arba khamsa sitta sab'a thamaniya tis'a ashara, so on and so forth. But wahdaniyya, it signifies the aspect of oneness. Meaning that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has these attributes, He cannot share them with anything. No one can share in His attributes. Why? Because it goes to the aspects of having a sharik. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, is that if He were to have a partner, it would be chaos in the world. And the aspect of it is that truly speaking, you can't say that He could have a partner, because again, that would take away from His lordship. Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to have a partner, that means that He would have to share in power. If I share in power, that means I'm no longer all powerful. So these are things that we have to understand when we're talking about the aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's completely one. And when we say one, we're not just signifying from the aspect of one versus two and so on and so forth. But we're saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one in every aspect of it. Again, we don't break up Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into parts and things like that. Because again, that's what the creation has. We have arms and legs and so on and so forth. That's what makes us up. We don't liken Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There's nothing like His likeness, and He's all hearing, all seeing. Wahdaniyah. The next one goes right into the aspect of qudra, power. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that is possessed of all power. Qudra. For example, one of my favorite sayings that, you know, my mother, you know, will probably be able to confirm, is that I usually like to say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. That there's no power nor strength except from Allah. This is this aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's absolute power. Now the thing is that some of these attributes that we're going to start to look at now are things that we may have a portion of, but when we're talking about from the standpoint of Allah, everything up here is from the standpoint of absoluteness. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has absolute power. And the thing is that even when we relate power to ourselves, like for example, the next one that we're going to look at after power is irada, which is will. But I'm going to mention it a little bit early, is that if I have the will, you know, the desire to lift up this pen, I have a will to do that. Now the thing is that do I have the power to do that? technically speaking, you would say yes, because why? I just did it. Now the thing is though, is that did I truly have the power to do that? Because if you look in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says what? And Imam Tahawi mentions it in his Tahawiyah as well, that he says, لا مشيئة لعبادي إلا ما شاءهم فما شاء لهم كان وما لم يشاء لم يكن. Is that there is no will, لا مشيئة لعبادي إلا, there's no will for his slaves except that which he wills for them. Whatever he wills will be, and whatever he does not will not. And this is similar to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions in the Quran, subhanallah, the verse is escaping me right now. It's towards the end of one of the surahs in Juz Amma. وَلَا تَشَاءُونَ إِلَّا أَن يَشَاءَ اللَّهُ, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that they will not will something except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed it. Meaning that my power, ultimately, if I want to be honest, is actually non-existent. Ultimately, I don't have any power. The only one that actually truly has power is Allah. Meaning that my power to lift this pen is only if it's in accordance with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and power. Is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and power matches my will and power, then I'll be able to lift this pen. If my will and power is not matched up with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and power, there's no way in the world I'll be able to lift this pen. I'll put it to you like this. How many people would love for it to be 70 degrees right now with a nice sunny day? It'd be nice, right? You might get a little close tomorrow. It's supposed to be like 57. But the thing is that how many of us have the power to do anything about it? So the aspect of it is, this is why, from the standpoint of Islam, one of the things that we say is that essentially everyone submits to Allah, ultimately. In the sense that they can only do what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed them to do. Meaning that, for example, if a person wants to commit some type of harm, they can only do it if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed that they will be able to do it. It's just like, for example, if a person wants to go and commit a crime, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala determines that their car is not going to work. So now they can't go out and commit the crime. Now they wanted to do it, they thought they had the power to do it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His will and His power was not in alignment with that. Now this goes into the aspect of evil and so on and so forth, but that's another, discussion. But ultimately, when we're talking about this aspect of power, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that has ultimate power. And that's how we have that famous, supplication, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. There's no power or strength except with Allah. Even in the aspect of the Fatiha. Anyone study Arabic grammar here? Anyone? A little bit? Did you get to sentences yet? Arabic. Kind of? Alright. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to give you a quick Arabic test real quick. In Arabic, there are only two types of sentences that you can have. You know what those are? Okay. So in Arabic, there are only two types of sentences that you can have. You can have either what they call a jumla fi'liya or a jumla ismiya. A jumla fi'liya, that's a verbal sentence. A jumla ismiya, that's a noun sentence. Now, in Arabic, though, there are three types of words that you can have. You can have a ismiya, a fi'liya, or a harf. You can have a verb, a noun, a verb, or a particle. Those are the three types of words you can have in Arabic. But I just said that you can only have two types of sentences, either a noun sentence or a verbal sentence. The way that you tell the difference between a noun sentence and a verbal sentence is basically what's the first word in the sentence. If the first word in the sentence is a noun, it's a noun sentence. If the first word is a verb, it's a verb sentence. Now the thing is that when we recite the Fatiha, what's the first verse in the Fatiha? This is not a pop quiz. I was like, that was not meant to be a trick question. The first verse in the Fatiha in most Qurans. So I will kind of I will give you that. There is an opinion that says that the first verse of the Fatiha is Alhamdulillah. And there's another opinion that says that the first verse is Bismillah. That's why if you look at different Qur'ans, some of them will start with the first verse being the Bismillah. Some of them will start with the first verse being Alhamdulillah. And there's different reasons why that is. That's a whole, we can talk about that if we ever get to tafsir and stuff like that. But the reason why I mentioned the bismillah is because B in Arabic is a harf. That's a harf. So when I say bismillah, essentially I'm starting this sentence with a harf. I just told you there's no such thing as a sentence starting with a harf. So that means what? Essentially this is an incomplete sentence. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim is considered to be an incomplete sentence. If you look to some of the books of tafsir, some of the books of Quranic explanation, they say that the missing word in the Bismillah is the words abda'u. Abda'u, it means I begin. And so essentially what we're saying here is that if I say Abda'u Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, is that I begin with the name of Allah, the most merciful, most compassionate. I begin in the name of Allah, the most merciful, most compassionate. I begin through the name of Allah, the most merciful, most compassionate. Essentially, I can't begin or do anything if it's not through Allah. That's the aspect of the Bismillah. And this is the aspect of the Bismillah starting every chapter in the Quran except for Surah Al-Bara or Surah Al-Tawbah. But the aspect of it is Abda'u Bismillah. I can't begin or do anything except with Allah. There's no way. So this is part of the aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. The next one, like we said, after the aspect of power is irada, which is His will. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He wills for things to be. However, these two kind of go hand in hand, in the sense that whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, it will be. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, that He only says to a matter, kun fayakun, be and it is. And part of the aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power is that He doesn't go through a process. Like for example, how many people would love to have $1 million in their bank account right now? It'd be nice, right? Now the thing is, how many people have the power to make that happen right now? Huh? If Allah wills, right? But I'm saying, how many people independently have the power to do that? And the thing is that, because let's, go outside the aspect of religion right now. Because there are people who will say that I do have the power to obtain $1 million. However, even for those people who may not be going from the aspect of religion, and they say I have the power to do so, under thinking from the standpoint of power that they actually have power themselves, is that even for them, they have to do what? They have to go through a process. They have to, whether they're going to do it legally or illegally. There's a process. Like if I'm going to do it legally, I have to set up some type of business model structure that's going to eventually over time generate $1 million. If I'm going to do it illegally, I'm still going to have to go through some type of process to, do whatever illegal business or, thing that I'm going to do that will eventually land me to $1 million. But again, you have to go through a process. And even in that, as certain as a person can be about themselves, there's still no guarantee. There's no guarantee. Whereas when we talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, if Allah wills something, then that's just what it is. And His power is such that, again, kun fayakun, be and it is. There is no process. Like, in other traditions, they have the concept that, God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and He rested on the seventh and so on and so forth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we know in Surah Al-Baqarah, Ayat Al-Kursi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does not sleep or have slumber overtake Him. He does not get tired. His whole aspect, kun fayakun. Again, when we talk to people who are not Muslim, in particular if they're coming from other traditions like Christianity and stuff like that, we have to, if we're going to talk about God, I usually don't recommend doing so. Like for example, in my side of the family, we are pretty much, I got a good amount of my family here, so I got to make sure I'm saying this right. But for the most part, in my side of the family, in terms of religious people, we are either religiously Christian or religiously Muslim. And generally speaking, the Muslims and the Christians, we get along as so long as we don't talk about religion. And generally speaking, I do not talk about religion. Like, as much as my family may consider me to be the religious nut in the family, they can tell you that if I go to an event or something like that, I do not talk about religion. And I purposely don't. In particular, like, for example, my uncle is a bishop. I've had one religious conversation with him that I can think of in any type of recent times. And outside of that, we don't talk about religion. And there's a reason for that. But the thing is that if I am going to get into a conversation with him or anyone else for that matter, if I'm going to talk about God, then we have to be on the same page when we're talking about God. Because your concept of God and my concept of God is not going to be the same. If you're talking about God from the standpoint of being a supernatural being, that's not the same thing when I'm talking about him being a necessarily existent God. And I'm also coming from a standpoint of looking at things from the standpoint of empirical knowledge versus rational knowledge versus religious knowledge. If your concept is just that all knowledge is the same, then this can possibly be true. But from my perspective, this will never be true. And this is one of the major aspects that people who are like atheists and stuff like that, they'll attack in terms of like Christianity, is that they'll say that part of the theology is illogical. And there is a basis for that. This is why, from this Islamic perspective, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أَفَلَا يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, do you not contemplate? أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ, do you not use your intellect? So on and so forth. We've been commanded to use our intellect so we can determine, basic aspects between truth and falsehood. طيب. Qudra, irada. The next one, number 9, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has knowledge or ilm. So when we say about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having knowledge or ilm, we're saying that His knowledge encompasses everything. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not ignorant of anything. Which again, it differs from other theologies. Other theologies, for example, they'll say that essentially God created the universe and then He just let it go. And He's just kind of watching what's taking place. That's not the Islamic concept. We say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His knowledge is such that if He wanted to, He could have done away with all this worldly stuff and so on and so forth, just put the people of hell in hell and people of paradise in paradise and call it a day. But we say out of His mercy He did not do that. Like, for example, does anyone in here a teacher or used to be a teacher? Anyone? Oh, that's right, I know. You're a teacher. Now, question for you. After about maybe 6 months or so of having students, can you more or less tell who's going to pass the test and who's not?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, the thing is that you're trying to be nice and you're trying to not just give general labels and stuff like that. I understand, but generally speaking, you can tell. Okay, I know this group is going to pass. This group is going to fail. This group is going to be somewhere in the middle. Now, the thing is that what happens, for example, let's pretend that I'm a teacher that was going to give out tests and so on and so forth. There's not going to be any tests, so you don't have to go running out the door. But let's say that I did give a test, right? And I came in and I said, look, we've been together for a good amount of time. I know where your intellectual capacity is and so on and so forth. So, I made up a test, but I'm just going to give you your results. You don't even have to take the test. You got an A, you got an F, you got a C, you got a B, you got an A+, you got a C-, you got a D, and you got a B. How many people are happy?
What I got?
So some people are happy, some people are like, yeah, I don't know about that one. But for the people that are not happy, why are you not happy? Yeah, because you didn't like necessarily the grade that you got. But even beyond that, you're probably also upset because you're going to say, you didn't even give me a chance. How do you know that I was going to get a C?
Right.
How do you know that I definitely was going to get a B, and so on and so forth? So the thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His knowledge is such that He already knows this. Remember, we said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not bound by time. He already knows what we were going to do. However, what is the whole purpose of us going through this life, us having two angels, Raqib and Atid? Well, eventually we'll talk about them as well. But having two angels writing down our deeds and so on and so forth, is so that when we come on Yawm al-Qiyamah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say what? Read your own book. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran? He does not wrong them, however what? They wrong their own selves. You'll be asked to read your own book. So that's the aspect. It's not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs to place us in this world so we'll know what we're going to do and so on and so forth. This is more or less for us. Just like the prayer itself. Does the prayer benefit Allah? No. When may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prevent this from ever happening. But if no one in the world prayed anymore, that is not going to reduce Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in anything. And if everyone decided that they wanted to pray, it's not going to increase Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in anything. It only benefits us. Just like when we commit sin, it only harms us. And so this is, one of the basic aspects of Islam is that, if you choose that you want to go on a particular path, that is your choice. But the thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knew that you were going to make that choice in the first place. And this is why you can have two people do the same thing. One is rewarded, one is punished. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows our ultimate endings, and He also knows our intentions. This is part of the aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge. It's not an aspect of Allah waiting for us to do something. He knows when we even intended to do it in the first place. This is why the Prophet ﷺ says what? He says that for a person that intends to do a good deed and he's not able to do it, he has one reward. If a person has an intention to do a good deed and he actually does it, he has 10 times or up to 70 or 700 or however many times Allah wants to multiply it. If a person intends to do an evil deed, but he doesn't do it, he has one reward. And if a person intends to do an evil deed and he actually does it, he just has one sin. Now the thing is that all this goes back to your very intention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already knew what the intention was going to be. This is why, for example, my teachers will always remind us is that anytime that you're inspired to raise your hands in dua, realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to give you something. Why? Because He already knew that you were going to make that dua. And so He already wanted to give you that thing. Because again, He's not ignorant of anything of us. Yeah, man.
My question was in regards to talking to people. I know you said that it's not good, but I know we should bring people closer to Islam through our actions. And when we start to talk about how Allah is all-encompassing of knowledge, how do we have those conversations or talk frankly about it when it comes down to predestination and things like that, where it's like Allah knows our final end, but we do have some control over the actions that.
So now you're going to the aspect, okay, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that determines everything, but we also have an aspect of free will, how do they work together? Me answering that question is going to go based upon this. My iPhone, right? Do you know how that works? And I'm not talking about you know how to use it, but the inner mechanics and the inner workings. Could you take it apart and put it back together and so on and so forth? But you would still utilize it and benefit from it, right? This is one of those aspects where we say that we believe in it, but we don't necessarily understand the details of it. So we understand the aspect of free will, we understand the aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, creating our actions, but how they directly intertwine together, Allah knows best ultimately. However, what we can say about it is that ultimately what we're truly being judged upon is our intentions behind it. That's like I was mentioning the aspect that two people can do the exact same thing, but one is punished for it, one is rewarded for it. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the intention behind those individuals. It's just like, for example, some will say that, even some of the Sahaba, For example, someone like Khalid ibn Walid, even though he killed, however many Muslims, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was still pleased with him because he knew Khalid's ultimate ending. Is that, he ultimately was going to be a Muslim and so on and so forth. Whereas, for example, there are some people who they pray and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is completely disgusted with their prayer. How do we know that? Because the prayer, that's one of the fundamental aspects of Islam, right? You can't be, there's debate about whether or not a person that intentionally leaves off the prayer is even still a Muslim. There is an honest debate about that. Most of the scholars say that that person is just a sinful individual, but there are some scholars who will say that, that person just actually left the fold of Islam completely. Now, the thing is that if that's the case with the prayer, then why is it in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say a verse like, فَوَيْلُ لِلْمُصَّلِّينَ? So woe upon those individuals that pray. Why? Because it goes back to their intention. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's mentioning in those verses is that those people only pray so that other people can see them, and so on and so forth. Whereas another person, they're praying, but they're sincerely submitting themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so ultimately, what we're really ultimately going to be judged on is our intention. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ, he has this famous narration where he says, إِنَّمَا أَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are only based upon intention. Because my actions, do I deserve, ultimately we don't deserve it at all, but, technically speaking, do I deserve infinity for something that's finite? Like, would you consider that to be a good deal? Like if someone gives me something that's finite and I give them back something that lasts forever? That's not a fair trade, so to speak. For example, if someone gives me $5, but I give them a lifetime, a lifetime salary, that doesn't equate. It's the same aspect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our actions are only finite situations. Like, when I pray for what? 10 minutes? You add up my lifetime and however much I prayed, that may add up to what? Let's just say, say that adds up to 20 years. Is 20 years a good enough exchange for infinity? So the thing is that it's not necessarily the action itself, it's the intention behind it. It's that, Ya Allah, if I were to live for 1,000 years, my intention is that I will continue to worship you for those 1,000 years. So my intentions, they're infinite. My actions, they're limited. But the aspect of free will and qadr, that is something that, the early Sahaba, they used to say that we believe in it without trying to do a kayfiyah to it. We believe in it without trying to fully grasp it. It goes back to like that example I gave of the child and nuclear fission. It's like, there are certain things that we're not going to fully understand in regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, but generally speaking, with qadr and free will, predestiny and free will is one of those things is that's not a conversation you want to just have with the general masses. But if it does come up, we discuss it. Ultimately, like we said, our intellect is not at the capability of understanding it. But just like, we recognize our ability to use an iPhone and so on and so forth, even though we don't fully understand it, that's the same thing that, we take in terms of our lives. Is that we understand that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that creates everything in existence. He already knows everything in existence, but at the same time, He did give us aspect of free will. But a good portion of it comes from the standpoint of our intentions and what we acquire. Meaning that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge of us, He already knows what we're going to incline towards to. And so He just facilitates that for us. And so that's how it's not an aspect of Him wronging us. And then if you want to get even more deeper, you have to go to the aspect of what it actually truly means in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in terms of things like His mercy and so on and so forth. Because one of the problems that people have is that they look at mercy and justice and so on and so forth from their perspective. But the thing is that when we talk about mercy and justice and so on and so forth, we're looking at it from the standpoint of what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considered to be mercy and justice. Because for us, mercy and justice essentially would be that, whatever someone wants, that's what they get. But the thing is that is not truly mercy, nor is that truly justice. Because there are some people, they would love not to be poor. They would love to have some type of financial, independence, some financial freedom. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not give them that. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from His knowledge, knows that that person does not need to have that. that money or that wealth is actually going to ruin them. And so he may keep them in a state of poverty because he knows that giving that wealth to them is going to ruin them. How do we know that? Or, for example, the Prophet ﷺ informed us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he answers dua in 3 different ways. One is that he gives you exactly what you want the way that you ask for it. You make dua, you know, Ya Allah, I need a new car. Boom. You got a new Honda or whatever the case may be. The second way that he answers your dua is that he prevents you from it because he knows that it's not good for you. Oh Allah, I want a new car. No, it's better for you to keep taking the bus. But the thing is that, you know, you're not even necessarily going to know that's the case. The third way that he answers your dua is that he doesn't give it to you in this life at all. He saves it to the akhirah. So that the person will come and say, Ya Rab, what is all these things? I haven't deserved any of them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say to that individual, he said, on such and such a date, you made this dua, this is your answer to that dua. To the point that the servant will say, Ya Allah, if only I was never answered a single dua in this world. Why? Because what is everlasting can never compare to what is, you know, finite. If you tell me that, you know, I can have whatever I want just by thinking about it, versus I can have something that's going to last me a couple years, you know, I'm going to choose the former. But the thing is that, you know, again, from the standpoint of human beings, we like, you know, the here and now, what we can actually sense here and now. But again, the aspect of qadr and free will is something that intellectually we're not going to be able to fully, you know, rationalize. And the thing is that this is something that is always done the human being in, is that we kind of look at our intellect as being an infinite, infinite level of possibility. That meaning that, you know, anything I can come to intellectually understand at some point. And that's not the case. Your intellect is just like any other muscle in your body. Like, you know, generally speaking, when I'm explaining this concept to some of the inmates that I work with, you know, the inmates, they, you know, one of the things that you can say about, you know, people who are locked up in prison is that they're probably some of the more consistent exercising people that I know. But in any case, so I usually use examples of like exercising. And I'll say like, you know, how many pull-ups can you do? And the thing is that, you know, eventually everyone's going to come to their limit. Is that, you know, whether it be 0, 1, 10, 50, 100, everyone's going to hit their peak. And they're not going to be able to go beyond that. Your intellect is the same way. You'll go to a certain extent, but then you're not going to be able to go beyond that. And if you look at it, we don't even understand ourselves. How are we going to understand God? I mean, honestly, the average person definitely doesn't understand themselves. You ask them anything about themselves, they couldn't tell you. And even scientists, they can't determine things. They're still trying to figure out this aspect of consciousness. That's why I said, it's like, some scientists will say, like, you know, do you actually truly exist? Like, they're still debating about whether we exist or not. So, you know, that tells you how much we as human beings really know. And so, it's one of the things that the Sahaba used to say, we believe in it without trying to do a how to it, like trying to like exasperate our brains over it. So, because I want to make sure that we try to finish and not go too long. Ilmun, the next one, Hayyun, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is living. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is living, meaning that He does not cease to exist, nor did He ever come to an end, or any of that aspect. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's living. We attribute Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with life. The next 3 are ones that I'm kind of just going to put all together just for the sake of time. But the next 3 is that He's hearing. And 12, seeing. And then lastly, 13, He has the aspect of speech. So, Hayyun, Sam'a, Basar, Kalam. That He's hearing, seeing, and He has the attribute of speech. Now again, all these things, His hearing, His seeing, His speech, none of these are like ours. Meaning that we are limited in all those things. I can only hear but so much. Like I can somewhat hear what's going on outside this room, but anything further than that, I have no idea. Seeing, we're even more limited. I can't see anything that's behind me or anywhere that my eyes are not pointing in that direction. And speech, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his speech is not like ours. It's not from the standpoint of vocal cords and so on and so forth. And all these attributes are pre-eternal. So there's more that we can say about these aspects, but this is just a basic aspect. Always remember, when we talk about God, always remember the aspect of there's nothing like his likeness. Laysa kamithlihi shay. There's nothing like his likeness. So we attribute all these things to him, but we don't try to compare it to ourselves. Meaning that God is not just a big man in the sky. We don't attribute that to being Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, these are considered to be necessary attributes of God. Now, these are not all-inclusive. It's similar to, like, for example, the 5 pillars of Islam. The 5 pillars of Islam, they're not the all-inclusive aspects of Islam. There's more to Islam than prayer, shahada, zakat, Saum, and hajj. But they make up the basis of Islam. Just like we're going to say here that these make up the basis for the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are necessary attributes. Their opposites are considered to be the impossibilities for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can never cease to exist. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot have a beginning. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot have an end. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be similar to his creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be dependent. He cannot have more than, there cannot be more than one God, and so on and so forth. Like as we went along, we talked about why these are impossibilities. And again, the aspect of impossibilities is not from the standpoint of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not being able to do whatever he wills. It's from the standpoint is that we don't attribute those things that are, illogically impossible to God himself. So the aspect, for example, like we talked about with power, that question of like, well, if God can do whatever he wants, can he create a rock that he can't lift? That would negate this aspect of power. Because you're trying to say, basically what you're trying to ask is that, can a being be powerful and not powerful at the same time? Which essentially is just a jumble of words. Going back to like that aspect, can an object be absolutely still but absolutely moving at the same time? It's just, it's illogical. And again, that's why we separated our knowledge from the standpoint of empirical versus rational. Empirical, we can break that. Empirical knowledge is what? If I drop this pen, it's going to fall. That's empirical. But I can still have the comprehension that that can break. Meaning that if I drop it, it won't drop. Like if I let it go, it won't drop. Like that's still fathomable to me. Even though I don't consider that to be the likely case, it's still something I would consider to be possible. And the thing is that this is important, again, when we talk about the aspect of miracles. Miracles fall into the aspect of breaking empirical norms. When we talk about rational, the logical, it's just like, for example, this concept of 1 equals 3. Everyone here told me that there's no way in the world that that would ever be true. And you would never believe that. And this is what we're saying is that, we don't attribute Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with these type of things. Like 1 equals 3 or a square circle or these type of things. And so that's how we, go into the aspect of miracles, but also at the same time, maintaining that God can do whatever he wills. It's that, yes, God can do whatever he wills, that is within the framework of what is actually considered to be possible. And then the other aspect of, so these are necessary, their opposites being impossibles. And then he also has the aspect of just possibilities as well. So for example, like today, it's possible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it just like it is today. But it's also possible that he could have made it that we had a blizzard today, so on and so forth. So these are possibilities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But these are our manifestations. And before I wrap up, going back to your aspect of qadr as well. SubhanAllah, I forgot what I was going to say. But maybe I'll remember next week. Because I'm not going to sit here and try to remember at this point. But in any case, oh yes, in terms of the aspect of qadr, in terms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's predestiny, one of the things that we understand from the standpoint of Islam is that we have three different attributes that we also attribute to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to the aspect of our actions and what we see in this world. You have what we refer to as qada. Qada, in terms of theology, is the aspect of those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already predetermined, meaning that everything that will be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala predetermined that in infinite, in his beginninglessness. Is that, everything that will be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already, again, Allah is not bound by time. So everything that will be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already determined what that's going to be. The aspect of qadr is that relates more to us in that when those things manifest, that's the qadr of Allah. So for example, it's Allah's qada was that this meeting was going to take place. The qadr was that we had to wait until February 2nd, 2022, 2020, at this particular time for it to manifest. That's the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we had to wait for that to come into existence. And then the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His will, is just that you have on a gray sweatshirt with black pants. I have on, some gray pants and a somewhat blue jacket, so on and so forth. Like the details that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has determined for us. And so that's another aspect to understand about the aspect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's qadr. But inshallah, we're going to wrap up here, and then next week we'll be talking about more of a deeper understanding of some of the things that we've been talking about, inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. الله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم سبحانه وكيل. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.